The crystal chandeliers of the Grand Pavilion cast a blinding, artificial glow over the elite, making their diamonds sparkle and their judgments even sharper. I stood in the shadows of the catering hall, my hands, once famous for their precision in a five-star kitchen, now trembling as I tucked a small container of organic salmon and a single slice of velvet cake into my tattered janitorial bag. I was invisible, a ghost in grease-stained coveralls, until a hand like a vice gripped my shoulder. "Found our little rat, Vance," the CFO sneered. His voice cut through the soft jazz like a serrated blade. He violently yanked my bag open, spilling the food onto the polished marble for the billionaires to see. Adriana, our ice-cold CEO, stepped into the circle of light. Her gaze didn't just see a janitor, it saw a parasite. "Stealing scraps, Silas?" she asked, her voice dripping with a disappointment that felt like a physical weight. "I thought you had more dignity than a common thief." Vance didn't wait for me to speak. He took his glass of vintage wine and poured it slowly, deliberately, over my head. The cold liquid soaked into my uniform as the crowd chuckled. "Trash belongs in the gutter," he laughed. I didn't flinch. I didn't beg. I just looked Adriana dead in the eye, my voice low and steady despite the wine dripping from my chin. "You can take the job," I said, "but this food is going home. Someone is waiting for it, and she matters more than your pride." I turned my back on the empire and walked toward the exit, leaving the room in a suffocating silence. Before the story continues, tell me what state or country you're watching from. Your comment helps this story reach more people. And if this story touches your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. The walk back to our home, a drafty, forgotten corner of an old industrial district, felt longer than usual. The cheap red wine Vance had poured over my head had dried into a sticky, sour crust on my neck, a constant reminder of the price I had paid for a single slice of cake. I didn't care about the humiliation or the ruined uniform. My hand remained clamped over my bag, protecting the small plastic container of organic salmon and velvet cake like it was the Holy Grail. I turned into the narrow alleyway behind the textile warehouse. There were no crystal chandeliers here, just the flickering buzz of a single street lamp and the damp scent of concrete. Mabel was waiting for me, sitting on a rusted milk crate, wrapped in a threadbare coat that was 2 sizes too small. She didn't cry when she saw me. She didn't complain about the cold or the darkness. She just looked up, her large, hollow eyes searching mine with a hope that felt like a knife in my chest. "Did you find the magic food, Daddy?" she whispered, her voice barely a thread. "I got it, Birdie," I said, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. To the elite at the gala, that salmon was just an appetizer they'd push around their plates. To Mabel, it was life. My daughter suffers from a rare, aggressive malabsorption syndrome. Her body treats processed sugars, preservatives, and mass-produced oils like literal poison. Most organic food in a typical grocery store is a marketing lie she can't afford to gamble with. The only food clean enough to keep her from collapsing in agonizing stomach cramps is the high-tier, laboratory-certified organic stock served at Adriana's private events. I wasn't always a janitor scrubbing the floors of people who look through me. 5 years ago, I was Silas Thorne, a Michelin-starred executive chef and a consultant for nutritional science. I was at the top of the food chain until I refused to sign a contract with a chemical conglomerate that wanted to hide dangerous additives in their healthy school lunch line. I blew the whistle, thinking I was a hero. Instead, the industry blacklisted me overnight. They didn't just fire me, they erased me. I became a thief and a liability in every corporate database in the country. Now, I was a man with no career and a daughter whose survival depended on the scraps of the people who had destroyed me. I knelt on the cold ground and opened the container. I watched Mabel take a small, delicate bite of the cake. A tiny, genuine smile flickered across her pale face. "It's so sweet," she murmured. "Did you have a big party, Daddy? Did you eat the big steak?" I lied. I told her I was stuffed, that I had sat at a golden table and eaten like a king. My own stomach was a hollow pit of hunger. But as I looked at her thin, frail arms, a cold realization settled over me. I had been fired. I had no way back into that building, no way to get the food she needed. And the $50 in my pocket wouldn't even cover her next round of electrolyte stabilizers. By defending my dignity in that ballroom, I had just signed my daughter's death warrant. I didn't know the shadows behind the textile warehouse had eyes. I was too busy watching Mabel's small, rhythmic movements as she ate, her fragile body finally relaxing as the nutrients hit her system. I only learned the truth much later, but the moment I walked out of that gala, Adriana hadn't called the police. Not yet. Her corporate brain demanded a clean closure. She wanted to witness the trash I was supposedly selling the stolen food to, so she could hand me over to the authorities herself and preserve the company's pure image. She had bypassed her private driver and followed my old, rattling truck at a distance, her black Mercedes, an invisible predator in the dim city streets. She watched me park and enter the alleyway. She stepped out of her car, her designer heels clicking softly on the asphalt before she transitioned into a silent, predatory walk. She stood behind a stack of weathered pallets, peering through the gap into the circle of light under the buzzing street lamp. Adriana expected to find a back alley deal or a group of low-life thieves. Instead, the untouchable CEO froze. Through the darkness, she saw a man she had just publicly shamed kneeling on the hard concrete. She watched as I used a clean handkerchief, the only clean thing I owned, to wipe a smudge of frosting from the cheek of a little girl who looked like she was made of porcelain and glass. She heard the lullaby I hummed, a song that didn't belong in a gutter, but it was the sight of my hands that truly shattered her. As I reached out to adjust Mabel's coat, the harsh yellow light hit the thick, roped scars on my forearms, marks of deep, professional grease burns that only a high-volume executive chef would carry. For the first time, she realized the janitor was a master of a craft she prided her company on. As she stood there, paralyzed by shame, a sudden wave of dizziness hit her. Adriana leaned against the brick wall, her breath hitching in her throat. Her vision blurred, and a familiar, metallic tightening seized her chest, the same mystery illness that had been draining her strength for months. From the corner of her eye, she saw her fiancé, Vance, sitting in his car, half a block away. He wasn't there to help her. He was on the phone, his face twisted in a cold, calculating grin as he spoke into an encrypted headset. Adriana's world tilted. She heard the faint echo of his voice through the quiet night. The transition to the synthetic additives is 80% complete. Once her health fails, I'll sign the acquisition papers ourselves. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The thief in the alley was saving a life, while the man she planned to marry was quietly taking hers. But as her legs gave out and she slid toward the concrete, the last thing she saw wasn't Vance coming to her rescue. It was me, the man she had just fired, looking up from my daughter with eyes that saw her collapse even before she hit the ground. I watched her slide down the brick wall, her expensive charcoal coat catching on the rough industrial surface. For a heartbeat, I considered just turning around, picking up Mabel, and disappearing into the shadows of the warehouse. Adriana had stripped me of my livelihood and my dignity in a room full of people who didn't even know my name. Why should I care if her world was tilting? But as I looked at her, I didn't see a billionaire CEO. I saw someone who was losing their breath, the same way Mabel used to before I learned how to save her. I stood up, my knees cracking. I didn't run. I walked toward her with the same steady, unhurried pace I used when a kitchen was on fire or a complex system was failing. I knelt beside her, my hands, the ones she had just called the hands of a common thief, moving with the precision of the master architect I used to be. Her face was turning a bruised shade of violet, her throat constricting as her body fought for air. I didn't need a medical degree to know what was happening. Her body was in a state of full systemic rejection. The synthetic additives Vance had been bragging about on his phone weren't just cost-cutting measures. They were a slow-acting poison for someone with her specific, sensitive blood chemistry. Mabel, stay back. I said, my voice low and carrying an absolute quiet authority. I reached into my bag and pulled out the small container of salmon. To the elite at the gala, it was an appetizer. To me, it was a concentrated source of pure, laboratory-certified organic enzymes. I knew that the high-tier stock Adriana's company supposedly produced contained a specific natural neutralizer for the synthetic compound Vance was using to replace the real ingredients. I forced a small, concentrated portion of the pure oil into her mouth, ensuring she swallowed. It was a gamble, a desperate, calculated move based on 5 years of nutritional science and the instinct of a man who had fixed what others couldn't. For 10 agonizing seconds, the alley was silent, the only sound the flickering buzz of the street lamp. Then, Adriana's chest suddenly heaved. She took a ragged, wet gasp of air, her eyes snapping open and finding mine in the dim light. The violet hue began to recede from her lips. She looked at me, then at the stolen food in my hand, and then at the roped grease scars on my arms that told the truth of my past. You, she whispered, her voice a ghost of its former power. Don't speak, I said, helping her sit up. I could see the headlights of Vance's car still idling half a block away. If I called the police now, he would use his resources to spin the story, and I would be the one in handcuffs for assaulting the CEO. I had to get her back into that building, into her private medical suite, where I could use her own diagnostic equipment to prove exactly what was in her blood. I stood before a choice that felt like a trap: keep my head down and protect my freedom, or step back into the lion's den to finish the job. I looked at Mabel, who was watching me with those wide, trusting eyes. I couldn't teach her to be a hero if I was a coward. I stood up, lifted the woman who had humiliated me into my arms, and began the long, silent walk back toward the glass tower. The lobby of the corporate headquarters was a tomb of glass and steel, silent and cold. I didn't rush. I carried Adriana through the revolving doors, with a heavy, rhythmic stride that echoed against the marble floors. I knew Vance would be there. A man like him needs to watch his empire fall, or his victims break. He couldn't resist being the first to see her collapsed state. There he is. Vance's voice erupted from the elevator bank. He wasn't alone. He had 2 city police officers and the head of corporate security with him. His face was a mask of rehearsed horror. He kidnapped her. I saw him drag her into that alley. Officers, he's already poisoned her. Look at her face. The officers stepped forward, hands hovering over their holsters. I didn't flinch. I didn't put Adriana down. I simply stopped and looked at the senior officer, my voice like ground stone. She's having a systemic reaction to synthetic toxicity. If you cuff me now, she'll be dead before the ambulance arrives. There's a private, rapid diagnostic suite in her executive office. Move, or be responsible for her wake. Maybe it was the scars on my arms, or the fact that I didn't sound like a janitor. The officer hesitated, then nodded. We moved to the private elevator. Vance was sweating now, his eyes darting toward his phone, probably trying to delete the digital trail of the additive orders he'd authorized. In the diagnostic suite, I laid Adriana on the medical cot. I didn't wait for permission. I drew a small vial of her blood and jammed it into the spectrograph. My fingers, once used to plating delicate garnishes, flew across the touchscreen. "What the hell are you doing?" Vance shrieked, reaching for the machine. "He's tampering with evidence." I caught his wrist in midair. I didn't punch him. I just squeezed until I heard the faint creak of his bones, forcing him to look at the screen. "I'm not tampering, Vance. I'm translating." The monitor flashed. 2 graphs appeared. The first showed a massive spike in a specific synthetic preservative, one that was banned in 3 countries but was 90% cheaper than the organic stabilizers Adriana's company was famous for. The second graph showed the rapid decline of that toxin in the last 10 minutes, countered by the pure organic enzymes I had just forced into her system. This toxin doesn't just appear, Vance. I said, my voice echoing in the absolute silence of the room. It's a specific batch signature, batch 409S, the one you authorized for the reformulation project last month. You're a janitor. You're making this up, Vance stammered, his face turning the color of wet ash. I was the chief consultant for the FDA's Din Dun Quality Board before your father's friends had me blacklisted, I growled. I know your batch signatures better than I know my own name. I hit a final key, routing the authorization logs from the company's secure server directly to the large wall monitor. There it was, Vance's digital signature, timestamped and verified, ordering the secret replacement of the organic stock with the synthetic poison that was currently killing his fiancée. The police officers didn't need to hear anything else. They stepped toward Vance. Adriana's hand suddenly clamped onto my wrist. She was sitting up, her breath shallow, but her eyes burning with a lethal, icy clarity. She didn't look at me. She looked at Vance as the handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists. You weren't just cutting costs, Vance, she whispered, the shame in her voice replaced by a cold, corporate executioner's tone. You were waiting for me to become incapacitated so the board would trigger the emergency succession clause. You were going to inherit the company over my grave. Vance began to sob, a pathetic, hollow sound as they dragged him out of the room. When the doors closed, the silence returned, heavier than before. Adriana turned to me. She looked at my grease-stained uniform, then at the spectrograph, and finally at the small, empty container of salmon I had used to save her life. I called you a thief. She wept, her pride finally collapsing into a million jagged pieces. And you? You used the very thing I accused you of stealing to give me my life back. Who are you, Silas? I'm a father who needs a job, I said quietly, looking at the time. And I've stayed away from my daughter for too long. I didn't take the 7-figure settlement Adriana offered the next morning. Money can buy a lot of things: customized medical equipment, organic groceries, and a house with a roof that doesn't leak, but it could never buy back the years I spent being treated like a monster in this industry. I told her I didn't want her charity. I wanted my name back. Adriana kept her word. Within a week, my professional blacklisting was scrubbed clean, replaced by a formal public apology from the board of directors. I was appointed as the corporate director of quality control, a position where no chemical or synthetic additive would ever touch a product of hers again without my signature. Mabel doesn't sit on a milk crate in a dark alley anymore. She has a sun-drenched room and a team of specialists who are actually making progress with her condition. We didn't move into a mansion. We bought a modest house near a park where the air is clean and the neighbors don't look through us. Adriana visits sometimes on Sunday afternoons. She usually brings a book of fairy tales and sits on our rug, reading to Mabel while I cook a meal that is actually fit for a princess. There is no grand romance, just a quiet, profound respect between two people who were both saved by a container of stolen food. This world is far too comfortable with judging a man by the grease on his hands or the desperation in his eyes. Society is quick to call a father a thief for taking a slice of cake, but slow to question the suit and tie executives who steal lives for a higher profit margin. Vance didn't fall because of a miracle. He fell because his own web of synthetic lies eventually choked him. Karma isn't a magical lightning bolt. It's the inevitable weight of your own choices finally catching up to you. When you choose greed, you reap shackles. When Silas chose sacrifice and integrity, even in the shadows of a dark alley, he reaped the dignity and the future his daughter deserved. A parent's love is a currency that never loses its value, and dignity is something that can never be truly taken. It can only be surrendered. While this specific narrative is a work of fiction, it reflects the very real, silent battles that single parents fight every day to keep their children safe. If you believe that a parent's dignity and sacrifice should always be honored, please type the word dignity in the comments below. Or share a personal experience about a time you were unfairly judged by your appearance. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more deeply emotional stories.